right, so finally in the 1940s, we were able to see a virus. And so we knew it was there around 1900, but we could actually see it in the 1940s, but we're still trying to figure out what it is. Is this a living organism? So now that we can see it, we can explore it even further. All right, so the question became, what is a virus? Is this something that is alive or not? And so the way we define living organisms in biology is organisms that can grow. They have to exhibit some certain characteristics. So growth is one, reproduction, being able to respond to the environment, being able to take in nutrients and build things, so metabolism. So all of these are things that we use to define life. Viruses, if I were to ask you, viruses, living or non-living, what would you say? Viruses, alive or not alive? Okay, so if they're non-living, are they the same as a table? Like a table's definitely non-living. What about viruses? It's a little harder to say they're not living when they have so many, when they can infect us, so they can reproduce. Viruses are considered at the cusp of life. They do have some characteristics similar to living things, but they don't have all of the characteristics that biology has decided define a living organism. So viruses are not currently considered alive, but they are kind of at the cusp of life. So let's look at what they can and cannot do. They are made up of nucleic acids, which is like living things. But you remember that central dogma, DNA to RNA to protein? Yeah, viruses don't do that. Viruses can be DNA and go to RNA to protein, but viruses can also just be RNA and not have any DNA. Viruses contain DNA, but they may not contain anything else. So they don't contain that, not until they get into a host. So that's different. They can reproduce, but not on their own. They have to be within a host. They're classified as an obligate intracellular parasite, so they cannot reproduce on their own. Living things respond to stimuli, but the viruses don't do that. Viruses can evolve because they're made up of nucleic acids, but they don't have a cell structure. They don't have that phospholipid bilayer that we says make up a cell. They don't grow. They don't undergo metabolism. So again, cusp of life, but they are not technically living organisms. All right, so what are they? If there's no cell membrane, what are they? They are considered the smallest infectious agent. So I am going to have you put kind of a asterisk about that. We're actually going to, at the very end of this chapter, talk about something that's even smaller than viruses, but they are super tiny. They are classified as ultra microscopic. We can't see them under light microscopes. We have to have an electron microscope. Comparison, if I took an average bacteria cell, and I don't know if you've really understood how small a bacterial cell is, but we have to magnify if you go back to microscopy, we have to magnify a bacteria cell 1,000 times to see those little bitty dots that you saw on the microscope for under that. So that's a lot of magnification, 1,000 times just to get those little bitty dots. You can't really see much other than a circle, if it's a coccus type of shape. You could put 2,000 viruses, bacteriophage, within that little bitty dot that's a bacteria cell. If you talk about a eukaryotic cell, they're much bigger. 50 million of polioviruses, which granted are one of the smallest viruses, but still 50 million can fit inside a human cell. Let me show you some other comparisons. All right, so red blood cell. This picture, this diagram is showing you the size of a red blood cell if we were to magnify it. Now, if you think about a red blood cell, my A and P people, right? Circulatory system, right? Red blood cells going through that. The smallest tube that a red blood cell has to go through, a capillary tube. The size of a capillary will fit one red blood cell at a time. So they go through single file. The very tiniest of parts of our circulatory system is a capillary, and the red blood cells go through one at a time. So that's a size difference. So get that into your mind. And then let's go back to our pictures. This is a red blood cell. So this is the smallest tubes, our capillaries, and they'll fit through one at a time. If I compare this eukaryotic red blood cell to a prokaryotic bacteria, you can see the size difference. This bacteria, oh, it's flagella. What's that arrangement? Oh, yeah, I hope you said Paratrichus, right? Flagellum all over the place. Flagella all over the place. So this is a prokaryotic cell. And remember on that microscope, they just look like little dots, little bitty tiny ovals or circles. So that's a prokaryotic cell. If you magnified 1,000 times, you saw what those looked like. These little bitty dots that you can't even see, let's magnify this. So now I've got my prokaryotic cell. These are viruses. Can you see the size difference? If I were to magnify these viruses, now we can get a little more detail. And that poliovirus, that's 30 nanometers. This is how small that is. A red blood cell by comparison is 10,000 nanometers. So that's quite a bit of a difference in size comparison. So these are really tiny. So think about one virus that gets inside the human body. It can move through, it doesn't move on its own, no flagellum, unlike this prokaryote with lots of flagella here. It doesn't move on its own. It's not living if it's not inside a cell. It's not even living inside a cell. It's not living. It can't move, but it is carried based on currents. So think about it if it gets into your circulatory system. Those currents are air currents. If we breathe that in, so somebody right next to you is coughing and coughs up these respiratory droplets. These droplets have virus particles within it. You inhale them through air currents, gets inside your body, gets into your circulatory system. Very easy for them to move through just based on currents in the body. So it really can get in. It's very difficult to get rid of it. So you can see how one virus gets in once it finds a cell that it can invade, replicates. We'll talk about that in a minute. It can be a big problem. Okay, so if this virus, we've said it's really, really small. If it's made up of things, we need to figure out what it's made up of. So I think I'll stop this intro video here, and then we'll figure out, okay, so what is a virus made up of? If it doesn't have a cell membrane, what does it have? So join me in the next video, and we'll talk about that. Thanks.